A single glance was all it took to ignite a billion-dollar firestorm. Onboard transatlantic Flight 729 senior flight attendant Brenda Miller surveyed her pristine first-class cabin, a kingdom she ruled with absolute authority. Her gaze fell upon a 14-year-old black boy in seat 2A, and in an instant her mind was made up. He didn't belong. Fueled by a quiet, venomous prejudice, she decided to move him a simple assertion of what she believed was the natural order. She had no idea that this quiet boy in a hoodie was the son of one of the most powerful men on the planet, and that her arrogant demand would trigger a phone call that would make $1 billion vanish in just 6 minutes. The muted hum of the Boeing 777-9 was a familiar lullaby to Leo Sterling. For him, flight was a quiet sanctuary, a liminal space between destinations where the world couldn't reach him. At 14, he'd already logged more air miles than most seasoned business travelers. Today, he was flying solo from New York to London, a trip his father Damian Sterling had sanctioned as a test of independence. Leo wasn't nervous. He found comfort in the predictable choreography of air travel, the click of the seatbelt, the gentle rumble of takeoff, the sterile scent of recycled air. He settled into seat 2A, a plush cocoon of leather and privacy, and pulled out his book, a worn copy of Carl Sagan's Cosmos. The universe in his hands was far more interesting than the curated luxury around him. He was dressed in his usual travel uniform, a simple dark gray hoodie from a nondescript brand, comfortable joggers, and a pair of well-worn sneakers. He was invisible by design. His father's world was one of deafening noise of headlines, stock tickers, and the constant pressure of managing a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm, Sterling Dynamics. Leo's quietness was his rebellion, his hoodie a shield against a world that always wanted something from the Sterling name. No one ever looked twice at a quiet kid in a hoodie, until today. Brenda Miller had been with Transatlantic Airways for 22 years. She saw her section of the first-class cabin not as a service area, but as her personal fiefdom. She prided herself on her ability to read passengers within seconds. The hedge fund manager with the twitchy thumb constantly checking his phone. The aging actress desperate for validation, but pretending to want privacy. The newly rich tech bro who didn't know which fork to use. She had a category for everyone. When she saw Leo in 2A, her internal filing system clicked shut on a folder labeled Problem. To her eyes, trained by 2 decades of her own biases, he didn't fit. The seat was worth over $9,000. The boy's clothes were, in her estimation, worth less than the complimentary amenity kit. She saw a misplaced charity case, a ticketing error, or worse, someone who'd scammed his way into her pristine cabin. Every moment he sat there was an affront to the established order she so carefully maintained. The inciting spark came in the form of Mr. Alan Harrison, a passenger in seat 4D. Harrison was a balding, perpetually flustered regional sales director for a mid-tier pharmaceutical company. He was a man who measured his life success in frequent flyer miles and complimentary upgrades. His seat 4D was perfectly fine, but it was adjacent to the galley, and the occasional clatter of service prep annoyed him. He flagged Brenda down with an impatient snap of his fingers. "Excuse me," he said, his voice laced with the weary authority of a man who flies business class twice a month. "Is there any possibility of moving? This is rather noisy." Brenda's professional smile clicked into place. "Of course, Mr. Harrison. Let me see what I can do." Her eyes scanned the cabin. It was full. Then her gaze landed back on Leo in 2A. It was the perfect solution, a neat and tidy way to restore her sense of order. She would appease a legitimate first-class passenger by displacing the imposter. She glided over to Leo's seat, her shadow falling over the pages of his book. He didn't look up, immediately lost in a chapter about distant nebulae. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a little too loud. Leo marked his page and looked up, his expression neutral. "Yes," and then came the line, the one that started it all. "Well, aren't you a lucky one, getting to sit all the way up here?" Leo blinked, processing the strange greeting. It wasn't a question. It was a statement dripping with a condescension, so thick he could almost taste it. "I guess so," he replied quietly, wanting only to return to his book. "It's a comfortable seat." "It certainly is," Brenda purred, "which is why we have a bit of a situation. We have one of our Platinum Elite members, a very loyal customer, who needs to be moved to a quieter seat. And this is the only one available, so I'm going to have to move you. She didn't ask. She informed. Her tone was final, as if she were telling him the time. Leo's brow furrowed slightly. He was used to being underestimated, but not to being dismissed outright. "I'm sorry, but this is my assigned seat," he said, his voice steady. "I paid for it." Brenda's smile tightened. The boy was arguing. This was worse than she thought. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Sometimes the system makes mistakes with third-party bookings or family point transfers. Don't you worry, we have a perfectly fine seat for you in the back." She gestured vaguely towards the curtain, separating first class from the rest of the plane, a flimsy barrier that in her mind separated two different species of human. "There's no misunderstanding," Leo said, a flicker of his father's firmness now in his voice. He reached into his backpack, pulled out his folder, and presented his printed boarding pass and the attached receipt. "Seat 2A, Leo Sterling." The ticket was purchased directly from the Transatlantic Airways website. Brenda glanced at the paper but didn't truly see it. Her mind was already made up. The name Sterling meant nothing to her. It was a common enough name. The receipt with its staggering price tag had to be a fake. A very good one, but a fake nonetheless. "Sir," she said, her voice dropping the false sweetness and taking on a stern authoritarian edge. "We have a paying customer who is being inconvenienced. I need you to take your things and move to the seat I assign you. Now." Mr. Harrison, watching from his seat, gave a smug little nod of approval. He was getting his upgrade. This is how the world was supposed to work. The important people were accommodated. From across the aisle in seat 2G, a young woman named Sarah, a journalism student on her way to a semester abroad, watched the scene unfold with growing unease. She saw the condescension in the flight attendant's eyes, heard the coded language, and saw the quiet, dignified boy being publicly humiliated. She instinctively unlocked her phone, her thumb hovering over the video record button. Something told her this was a moment that needed a witness. The standoff was set. The flight attendant, the entitled passenger, and the quiet boy who was about to show them just how small their world really was. The air in the cabin grew thick with unspoken tension. The low hum of the engines seemed to fade, replaced by the sharp focus of a brewing confrontation. Leo held the flight attendant's gaze, his boarding pass still held between his fingers. He wasn't a confrontational person, but his father had taught him a core principle: never surrender your position when you are right. "I'm not going to move," Leo stated, his voice devoid of anger, but filled with an unshakable resolve. "This is my seat. If Mr. Harrison has an issue with his seat, perhaps you can offer him a different solution." Brenda was incensed. It was one thing for the boy to be in the wrong place. It was another for him to defy her authority. She saw it as a direct challenge, not just to her, but to the entire hierarchy of the aircraft. "The solution," she hissed, her voice low and menacing, "is that you will move. We have procedures for non-compliant passengers. This plane will not take off with this issue unresolved. You are delaying the departure for over 300 people. Do you want to be responsible for that?" She was weaponizing the entire passenger list against him. It was a classic tactic designed to isolate and pressure the target into submission. Several nearby passengers, sensing a delay, began to stir, casting annoyed glances towards Leo's seat. They didn't know the context, they only knew their flight wasn't moving. Mr. Harrison, emboldened by Brenda's aggression, decided to weigh in. He unbuckled his seatbelt and walked the few steps over, standing behind Brenda like a loyal squire. "Listen, son," he began, his tone dripping with paternalistic condescension. "Let's not make a big deal out of this. I've been flying with this airline for 15 years. I have status. That means something. Just move to the other seat. It's for the best." Leo looked from Brenda's furious face to Harrison's smug one. He saw the tag team for what it was, two people enforcing an unwritten rule book where his rights were secondary to their convenience. "Your status doesn't invalidate my ticket," Leo replied calmly, turning his attention back to Brenda. "You're asking me to give up a $9,000 seat for one in economy plus. Are you offering a refund for the difference?" This question, so logical and direct, seemed to short-circuit Brenda's brain. It introduced economics into what she considered a matter of social order. "This isn't about money," she snapped a little too quickly. It's about accommodating our valued customers and resolving a seating discrepancy. There is no discrepancy, Leo insisted. There is only you asking me to move from a seat I legally purchased. Sarah, the student across the aisle, had seen enough. Her journalistic instincts and her sense of basic decency kicked in. She pressed record. The phone was angled down, resting on her lap, the lens peeking out from under her jacket. She captured Brenda's rigid posture, Harrison's smirking face, and Leo's impossibly calm demeanor. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice clear and firm. "I couldn't help but overhear. The young man showed you his boarding pass. Why is there still an issue? It seems highly inappropriate to remove a passenger from their paid seat." Brenda whipped her head around her eyes, flashing with fury at this new challenger. "Ma'am, this is a crew matter. Please stay out of it." "It became a passenger matter when you started holding up the flight and publicly shaming a child," Sarah retorted, her voice gaining strength. Brenda felt the situation slipping from her grasp. She was being question-defied. She needed to reassert control. She reached for her trump card. "That's it," she announced to the cabin at large. "The passenger in 2A is being disruptive and refusing to comply with crew instructions. I am calling the captain." She turned and marched toward the cockpit, her heels clicking on the floor like tiny hammers of judgment. Mr. Harrison looked triumphant, crossing his arms as if the matter was now settled. The final authority would surely see things his way. A few minutes later, Captain David Evans emerged. He was a man in his late 50s with a weathered face and an air of command that came from 30 years of flying. He was also on the tail end of a grueling 4-day rotation and wanted nothing more than to get this plane in the air. He walked over Brenda at his elbow, whispering her version of the events into his ear. Refusing to move, ticketing error, being belligerent, causing a delay, were the fragments the nearby passengers could hear. Captain Evans looked at Leo. He saw a kid in a hoodie. He saw a senior flight attendant he'd flown with dozens of times. He saw a manifest full of people waiting to go. His decision was made before he even spoke. "Son," the captain said, his voice deep and seemingly reasonable. "I'm Captain Evans. My flight attendant tells me there's some confusion with your seat." "There's no confusion, Captain," Leo said, holding up the boarding pass yet again. "There's only a request for me to vacate my paid seat for another passenger's convenience." The captain sighed, a weary put-upon sound. "Listen, I can't get into the ticketing details right now. What I need is for everyone to be seated so we can depart. Brenda has assigned you a new seat. I need you to go to that seat. We can sort out any financial compensation on the ground." It was a dismissal, a corporate-sanctioned order to comply now and complain later. The system was closing ranks. The captain, the flight attendant, the entitled passenger, they were a wall. Leo was alone. Brenda's smug smile returned. She had won. The captain of the entire aircraft had sided with her. She looked at Leo, her eyes gleaming with victory. "You heard the captain. Take your bag and go." Leo looked at the faces arrayed against him. He saw their certainty, their absolute belief in their own authority, and his lack of it. He knew he could not win this argument with words. His father had taught him that some situations required a different kind of leverage. He let out a slow, deliberate breath. He looked the captain in the eye. "Okay," he said softly. The word hung in the air. Brenda and Harrison exchanged a triumphant look. The boy had finally caved. Leo then added, "I will move, but first may I please make one phone call?" The request was so unexpected, so polite, that it caught them off guard. Captain Evans, eager to resolve this, nodded. "Fine, but make it fast, son. We're already behind schedule." Brenda smirked. "Who are you going to call your mommy?" Leo didn't answer her. He simply pulled out his phone, a standard nondescript model. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb stopping on a single-entry dad. He pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered on the other end, a voice that commanded boardrooms and moved markets with a single word. "Leo, everything all right." "I'm okay, Dad," Leo said, his voice steady. "I'm on the plane. Transatlantic Airways Flight 729 to Heathrow." Brenda rolled her eyes, making a show of looking at her watch. "There's a situation," Leo continued, his voice dropping slightly. "They're making me give up my seat for another passenger. They said I'm being non-compliant." There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was not a pause of confusion, but of sudden, chilling focus. "What is the flight attendant's name?" Damien Sterling's voice was quiet, almost unnervingly calm. She said her name is Brenda. Brenda Miller, Leo relayed. The captain's name is David Evans. I see, Damien said. The two words were colder than a polar ice cap. Leo, do exactly what the captain says. Move to the other seat. Do not argue further. Be polite. I will handle this. The situation will be resolved before you land. I love you, son. Love you too, Dad. Leo hung up. The entire call had taken less than 45 seconds. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, picked up his backpack and his book, and stood up. He looked at Brenda and Captain Evans. Okay, he said. Where would you like me to sit? Brenda pointed triumphantly towards the economy cabin. Mr. Harrison eagerly slid into the now vacant seat 2A, letting out a satisfied sigh as he stretched his legs. The battle was over. The natural order was restored. Brenda Miller watched Leo walk through the curtain, a small, triumphant smile on her face. She had no idea that she hadn't just sent a boy to the back of the plane. She had just placed a multi-billion-dollar corporation in the crosshairs of one of the most powerful and ruthless men on the planet, and the clock was ticking. The walk to the back of the plane was a short one, but for Leo it felt like miles. He passed the rows of premium economy, then the curtain into the main cabin. The air was warmer, the space tighter, the low murmur of conversation louder. He found the seat Brenda had designated for him, 34B, a middle seat, a special kind of traveler's hell wedged between a snoring man whose shoulder was already encroaching on his space and a woman who had surrounded herself with a fortress of bags. Leo stowed his backpack, sat down, and opened his book. He didn't sigh. He didn't complain. He just began to read. He had done his part. Now his father would do his. Up in first class, the mood was celebratory. Mr. Harrison was gleefully accepting a glass of pre-departure champagne from Brenda. Thank you for taking care of that, he said, raising his glass to her. Some people just don't understand how things work. It's my pleasure, Mr. Harrison. Brenda replied, her voice filled with pride. We always prioritize our most valued customers. Captain Evans had returned to the cockpit, satisfied that the disruption was handled. He gave the all-clear to the ground crew. Cabin secure, he radioed. Ready for pushback. The heavy cabin door was sealed with a hydraulic hiss. The jet bridge began to pull away. Everything was back on schedule. The first 6 minutes of the flight were completely normal. The plane pushed back from the gate, the engines spooled up with a rising whine, and it began its slow taxi towards the runway. And then the world broke. It started not with a bang, but with a ping, a single electronic chime in the cockpit. It was a message coming through the ACARS system, the digital data link that connects the aircraft to the airline's ground-based operations. This was unusual. ACARS was for flight plans, weather updates, and technical data, not routine chatter. The first officer, a young, sharp pilot named Mark, read the message on the small screen. His eyes widened. Captain? Mark said, his voice suddenly tight. You need to see this. Captain Evans glanced over. The message was from their Central Operations Control Center, marked urgent. Ganani, TA-729, hold position immediately. Do not proceed to runway. Await direct communication from CEO Robert Maxwell. Acknowledge. Evans' blood ran cold. Hold position, a direct communication from the CEO. In his 30 years of flying, he had never seen a message like this. It was the aviation equivalent of the world grinding to a halt. Operations, this is Transatlantic 729. Evans spoke into his headset, his voice now laced with anxiety. Message received. Holding position at taxiway Delta 7. As he spoke, another ping arrived. This one was from the company's internal crew notification system, sent to the lead flight attendant's tablet. Brenda, who was preparing the cabin for takeoff, saw the alert. It was a flash bulletin from corporate headquarters. Subject urgent, immediate stock price alert message. All crew be advised, Transatlantic Airways, NYSE TAA parent holding company, Global Wings Alliance, NYSE GWA is experiencing unprecedented and catastrophic after-hours trading activity. All non-essential communications are to cease. Stand by for executive orders. Brenda stared at the tablet, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. Stock price. What did that have to do with anything? In the cockpit, Captain Evans's satellite phone reserved for the most dire of emergencies began to ring. The caller ID read Maxwell Robert CEO. Evans swallowed hard and answered, "Captain Evans." The voice on the other end was frantic, strained. It was Robert Maxwell, the polished, unflappable CEO of Transatlantic Airways. Today he was very flapped. "Evans, what in God's name is happening on your plane?" Maxwell yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "Mr. Maxwell, sir, I don't understand," Evans stammered. "We had a minor seating issue with a passenger, but it was resolved, and we're on our way to the runway." "A minor seating issue?" Maxwell's laugh was hysterical. "A minor issue, Captain. 6 minutes ago, Damian Sterling liquidated his entire personal and corporate stake in Global Wings Alliance. We're talking 9% of the company. It triggered a flash crash in after-hours trading. The stock is down 34%. That's a $12 billion paper loss, Evans." Captain Evans felt the air leave his lungs. Damian Sterling, the name was legendary, a titan of industry, a man who didn't just invest in companies, he made or broke them. "Damian Sterling," Evans repeated, his mind racing. "Sir, I don't see the connection." "The connection is sitting in your goddamn plane," Maxwell screamed. "His son, his only son, Leo Sterling. You just had him forcibly removed from his first-class seat. What were you thinking?" The world tilted on its axis. Evans's mind flashed back to the quiet boy in the hoodie, the boarding pass he'd dismissed, the name he hadn't even bothered to register. Leo Sterling. "And it gets worse," Maxwell continued, his voice now a terrified whisper. "Sterling Dynamics just froze the $1 billion credit line they were financing for our new A350 fleet acquisition. The deal is dead. Our entire modernization plan is about to collapse, all because of a seating dispute on your flight. One phone call, 6 minutes, a $1 billion freeze, a $12 billion market cap implosion. The quiet boy in the back of the plane wasn't just a passenger. He was the ignition key to a financial nuclear bomb." "Get that boy," Maxwell commanded, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "Get him, put him back in his seat, give him whatever he wants. Give him the damn plane if he asks for it. And you, Evans, you will go back there and you will apologize. You will beg for his forgiveness. The future of this entire airline depends on what you do in the next 5 minutes." The line went dead. Captain Evans sat in his chair paralyzed. The hum of the engines was now a funeral dirge. He looked at his first officer, whose face was as white as a ghost. He finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He hadn't just backed his flight attendant. He had blindly followed a petty prejudice off a financial cliff. He unbuckled his seatbelt. His legs felt like lead. He stood up and pushed open the cockpit door. The first person he saw was Brenda Miller, who was staring at her tablet, her face a mask of confusion and dread. "Brenda," Captain Evans said, his voice a gravelly, defeated rasp. "Come with me. We have made a catastrophic mistake." The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted from smug satisfaction to buzzing confusion. The prolonged hold on the taxiway, combined with the visible panic on the crew's faces, had set everyone on edge. Mr. Harrison, still lounging in seat 2A, was starting to get annoyed again. This delay was eating into his precious time. Then the cockpit door opened and Captain Evans emerged, his face ashen. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Behind him was Brenda, whose confident swagger had evaporated, replaced by a trembling uncertainty. "Brenda, where is he?" the captain asked, his voice low and urgent. "Who, Captain?" she asked, though a sickening knot of dread was already tightening in her stomach. "The boy, Leo Sterling. Where did you put him?" The name spoken with such reverence and terror by the captain finally registered. Sterling. Not a common name. The Sterling. Brenda's mind, in a flash of pure horror, connected the dots. The quiet confidence of the boy, the instant phone call, the corporate panic. It wasn't a call to his mommy. It was a call to an emperor. "He's in the back," she stammered, pointing a shaky finger toward the curtain. "Seat 34B. Without another word, Captain Evans strode through the cabin, his posture rigid with dread. Brenda followed in his wake like a condemned prisoner on her way to the gallows. The other first-class passengers watched agog. They passed through the curtain into the main cabin. The contrast was stark. Here people were oblivious, chatting, watching movies. The captain scanned the seat numbers, his eyes finally landing on 34B. There was Leo, perfectly calm, a small reading light illuminating the pages of Cosmos. He was so absorbed in his book that he didn't even notice the two uniformed figures standing in the aisle until the captain cleared his throat. Leo looked up, his expression unchanged. He saw the captain and the flight attendant. He simply marked his page and closed the book, waiting. Captain Evans felt a profound sense of shame. He was the commander of a multi-million-dollar aircraft, and he was about to grovel before a 14-year-old boy he had wronged. "Mr. Sterling." The captain began, his voice cracking. He was physically unable to call him son again. "Mr. Sterling, on behalf of myself and the entire airline, I offer you my most profound and sincere apologies. There has been a grave and inexcusable misunderstanding." Leo simply looked at him, his silence more powerful than any outburst would have been. "Your seat in first class is waiting for you." Evans continued, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush. We were completely in the wrong. I was wrong. I made an assumption without verifying the facts, and I deeply regret it." Brenda stood behind him, mute and shaking. Her world had crumbled in a matter of minutes. The condescending smirks, the smug satisfaction, it had all curdled into pure, undiluted terror. This boy, this child she had dismissed and humiliated, held her entire life in his hands, and he didn't even have to raise his voice. "Brenda," the captain said, turning to her. His voice was cold steel. "Apologize to Mr. Sterling." Brenda's eyes darted between the captain's furious face and Leo's calm one. Her mouth opened, but only a strangled squeak came out. She swallowed, trying to force the words. I am sorry," she finally managed to choke out. It was a pathetic, flimsy apology, devoid of any genuine remorse and heavy with the stench of fear. Leo looked at her for a long moment. He didn't acknowledge her apology. He didn't have to. He simply turned his gaze back to the captain. "Thank you for the apology, Captain Evans," he said, his voice polite and measured. "But I'm quite comfortable here. I'd like to just finish my book." The refusal was a gut punch. It was worse than yelling. It was dismissal. He was showing them that their premium cabin, their groveling, their panic, it meant nothing to him. He had been denied his rightful place, so now he would deny them their absolution. "But, Mr. Sterling, please," the captain begged now, desperate. "We insist. We'll have your seat prepared. We can offer you anything." A bottle of Dom Perignon 2008, a meal from the crew's private selection. Leo gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "No, thank you. I'm fine right here." A message pinged on the captain's phone. It was another text from the CEO. "Is he back in 2A, yet the board is calling me. The news is leaking." The captain was trapped. He couldn't physically force the boy back to first class any more than he should have forced him out. Meanwhile, back in 2A, Mr. Alan Harrison was watching the procession with disbelief. He saw the captain, the most powerful man on the plane, bowing and scraping before the kid he'd helped displace. He didn't understand the name Sterling, but he understood the shift in power. He was suddenly horribly aware that he was sitting in the wrong seat. He started to feel a prickle of sweat on his brow. Sarah, the journalism student, had not stopped recording. Her phone had captured it all: the captain's frantic apology, Brenda's pathetic mea culpa, and Leo's quiet, dignified refusal. She knew this was more than just an airline dispute. This was a story. The plane remained parked on the taxiway, a multi-million-dollar monument to Brenda Miller's prejudice. Inside, the power dynamics had been inverted with the force of a tectonic shift. The king was in the back of the plane, and the jesters who had deposed him were now begging him to retake his throne. But the king was happy with his book, and their kingdom was burning down. While Flight 729 sat inert on the tarmac at JFK, a digital firestorm was consuming its parent company in the heart of Manhattan. The offices of Global Wings Alliance on the 50th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park had descended into chaos. Damian Sterling had not made his move in a fit of pique. It was a cold, calculated act of financial warfare. When he hung up the phone with Leo, he made two calls. The first was to Isabella Rossi, the famously sharp and unflinching head of Sterling Dynamics Trading Division. The instruction was simple and brutal. Isabella, Damien said, his voice a low, dangerous hum. Liquidate our entire position in Global Wings Alliance. Ticker, GWA, all of it. Use after-hours dark pools to mask the initial volume, then sell the rest on the open market. I want it done in the next 10 minutes. Isabella didn't ask why. She simply executed. The sale of such a massive block of shares representing nearly a tenth of the company hit the market like a meteor. Automated trading algorithms sensing a catastrophic event began selling in panic. Human traders seeing the sterling name attached to the sell-off assumed the worst, a hidden bankruptcy, a massive fraud, and dumped their shares as well. The stock didn't just fall, it evaporated. The second call was to the firm's chief legal counsel. The $1 billion revolving credit facility we extended to GWA for their Airbus fleet purchase. Damien said, find the clause on brand disparagement and material reputational risk. I want you to invoke it. Freeze the line of credit. Effective immediately. Send the notification to their CEO's office and leak the freeze to the Wall Street Journal. This second move was the killer blow. Selling the stock hurt them. Freezing the credit line crippled them. It was a public declaration of no confidence from their most important financial partner. It signaled to the entire market that transatlantic airways was, in Damien Sterling's view, toxic. In his office, CEO Robert Maxwell was watching his career die on a Bloomberg terminal. The red downward arrow next to GWA was a dagger in his heart. His phone was a cacophony of incoming calls from board members, major investors, and news reporters. "Robert, what the hell is going on?" screamed Marcus Thorne, the chairman of the board. "The stock is in free fall. The news is saying Sterling pulled the A350 financing." "Why?" There was an incident, Marcus." Maxwell stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. "On a flight with Damien Sterling's son." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. His son. What did we do to his son? There was a seating dispute, a flight attendant. She moved him from his first-class seat. She what? Thorne's voice was a mixture of disbelief and pure fury. "You're telling me this $12 billion meltdown, this billion-dollar credit freeze, is because one of our flight attendants picked a fight with a 14-year-old boy over a chair?" The absurdity of it was crushing. Their global multi-billion-dollar empire was being brought to its knees by an act of petty prejudice that probably cost the airline nothing to avoid. "Fix it, Robert," Thorne ordered, his voice now dangerously quiet. "I don't care what you have to do. Apologize, resign, offer him a lifetime supply of airplanes. You fix this, or the board will fix you. You have until that plane lands in London." Back on the plane, Captain Evans was desperately trying to convey the gravity of the situation to Leo without causing mass panic. He was kneeling in the aisle of economy class, an act of submission that did not go unnoticed by the surrounding passengers. "Mr. Sterling," he pleaded in a low voice, "this has escalated. Your father, he's a very important business partner. This situation is causing significant repercussions for the company, for the jobs of thousands of people. It was a veiled attempt at guilt, a final desperate play. Look at all the people you're hurting by not accepting our apology." Leo looked up from his book, his eyes holding a wisdom far beyond his years. "She was willing to delay this plane and have me removed because she didn't like where I was sitting." He said, his voice soft but clear. "You backed her up without asking any questions. Mr. Harrison wanted a quieter seat. All of you made your choices. My father is making his." It was a checkmate. Leo understood the situation perfectly. This wasn't his fault. It was the consequence of their actions. Defeated Captain Evans returned to the cockpit. He radioed the tower. "Tower, this is Transatlantic 729. We are returning to the gate, canceling departure." The announcement sent a ripple of groans and complaints through the aircraft. But for the crew and the executives on the ground, the flight was already over. The journey had been a 6-minute, $12 billion flight to nowhere. As the plane slowly taxied back to its gate, the full weight of karma was gathering its strength, ready to strike the moment the doors opened. For Brenda Miller, Alan Harrison, and Captain Evans, the real nightmare was just beginning. The jet bridge reconnecting to the aircraft felt like a gangplank. The moment the cabin door hissed open, the controlled environment of the flight dissolved, and the harsh reality of the outside world flooded in. Waiting at the gate were not the usual ground crew, but a delegation of grim-faced men and women in expensive suits. At their forefront was the Vice President of North American Operations for Transatlantic, a man who had been yanked out of a dinner meeting and told to handle a code black situation. His eyes scanned the disembarking first-class passengers until they landed on Captain Evans. The VP's glare could have melted steel, but they weren't there for the captain, not primarily. A quiet, powerfully built man in a simple black suit stepped forward, his eyes finding Leo the moment he emerged from the jet bridge. "Mr. Sterling," the man said, his voice calm and respectful. "I'm Arthur from your father's security team. I'm here to take you home." Ifram, Leo simply nodded and followed Arthur, who expertly steered him away from the corporate delegation and towards a private exit. Leo never looked back. With Leo gone, the corporate execution could begin. The VP of Operations stepped directly into Captain Evans' path. "Captain, a word." He gestured for Evans to follow him to a quiet corner of the terminal. Mr. Alan Harrison, still bewildered, shuffled off the plane, trying to look inconspicuous. He thought he might have gotten away with it. He was wrong. As he entered the main terminal, two people from his company's HR department, dispatched urgently from their downtown office, intercepted him. "Alan Harrison." One of them asked, though it wasn't a question, "We need you to come with us." But the most immediate and brutal karma was reserved for Brenda Miller. As she stepped off the plane, her face pale, and her uniform looking suddenly cheap and ill-fitting, she was met by a union representative and the head of in-flight services. "Brenda," the manager said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "you are suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation. Hand over your crew ID." "Suspended?" Brenda cried, her voice cracking. "But it was a misunderstanding. I've been with this airline for 22 years. 22 years of service doesn't give you the right to bankrupt the company?" The manager retorted coldly. "An escort will accompany you from the premises." The union rep just shook his head, a silent signal that this was a battle he couldn't and wouldn't fight. Brenda's actions were indefensible, and then it got worse. Sarah, the journalism student, had disembarked and immediately uploaded her video to several social media platforms with the caption, "Transatlantic flight attendant and Captain Force Black, teen from paid first-class seat." His one phone call apparently cost the airline billions. Funny, she tagged the airline major news outlets and used hashtags like Murnawash flying while black, Josh airline from hell, and Brenda the flight attendant. The video went viral with the speed of a lightning strike. Within an hour, it had 1 million views. By the time Brenda was being escorted out of a side exit of JFK, her face was all over the internet. The footage was damning. It captured her sneering tone, Harrison's entitled smirking, the captain's dismissiveness, and Leo's quiet dignity. The court of public opinion delivered its verdict instantly and unanimously. Brenda Miller became infamous overnight. Her full name, her city, her work history, it was all unearthed and spread by digital vigilantes. She was fired the next day via a tersely worded email. Her union quietly dropped her case after viewing the viral video citing gross misconduct. The career she had built over 2 decades was incinerated. She had to sell her house to cover her legal fees as she tried to sue for wrongful termination, a case that was laughed out of court. The order she so cherished was gone, replaced by infamy and financial ruin. Alan Harrison's fate was just as swift. His company, a major pharmaceutical firm, was pathologically averse to bad press. The video of their regional sales director harassing a minor was a PR nightmare. He was fired the following morning for violating the company's code of conduct. His platinum elite status was revoked. The airline banned him for life. The small amount of power he thought he had was an illusion, and it vanished the moment a brighter light was shone upon him. For Captain David Evans, the fall was less public, but just as profound. He wasn't fired outright, his union had more leverage, and pilots are harder to replace. But he was demoted. Stripped of his command of the flagship 737 fleet, he was reassigned to short-haul domestic flights on older aircraft. Every pilot who flew with him knew the story. They called him Captain Billions behind his back. His career was effectively over a long, slow descent into irrelevance. He had failed the ultimate test of command. He had chosen the easy prejudice over the hard truth, and the consequences were inescapable. The airline itself was bleeding. The stock stabilized but remained grievously wounded. The A350 fleet deal was in tatters. CEO Robert Maxwell was forced to issue a groveling, multi-page public apology. He announced a complete overhaul of the company's diversity, equity, and inclusion training, mandated for every employee from the baggage handlers to the board of directors. The financial world watched fascinated. Damian Sterling had not uttered a single public word. He didn't need to. His actions had spoken with the thunderous roar of $1 billion. He had shown the world that in the modern age, the consequences for prejudice weren't just social. They could be swift, brutal, and financially apocalyptic. A black Cadillac Escalade, its obsidian paint absorbing the harsh, fluorescent lights of the private hangar, waited like a patient predator. This was a world away from the frantic public chaos of the main terminal at JFK. Here the air was still and smelled of jet fuel and clean concrete. The cacophony of panicked announcements and rolling luggage was replaced by a cathedral-like silence. As Leo stepped out of the sterile jet bridge, the man named Arthur, whose simple suit failed to conceal a formidable presence, guided him with a quiet, reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This way, Mr. Sterling. Your father is waiting." Leo slid into the buttery leather of the back seat. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The man sitting opposite him was not the titan of finance, whose name was currently being cursed and whispered in every major newsroom and boardroom in the world. He was simply Damian Sterling, Leo's father. His tie was slightly loosened and the severe lines of his face softened as he looked at his son. He didn't speak immediately, instead, just enveloping Leo in a firm, grounding hug that communicated everything words could not. "Are you all right, son?" Damian finally asked, his voice a low rumble, devoid of the panic that had infected an entire airline. "I'm fine, Dad," Leo replied, his voice still steady. He leaned back into the seat, the adrenaline from the confrontation finally beginning to fade, leaving a strange sense of clarity in its wake. It was a long flight for one that never left the ground. A rare, genuine smile touched Damian's lips. "I imagine so. I saw the video. You handled yourself with extraordinary grace, Leo. You stated your facts. You never raised your voice. You never surrendered your dignity. That is a strength that money cannot buy. I've never been more proud of you." "I knew you'd handle it," Leo said, a simple statement of absolute faith. Damian nodded, his expression shifting from paternal pride to the focused intensity of a teacher explaining a crucial lesson. "I did. But it's vital you understand precisely how and why. What I did today wasn't an act of anger. Anger is a fleeting, messy emotion. This was a response. It was an answer to a question they asked." He leaned forward, his gaze locking with Leo's. "That flight attendant, Brenda Miller, she looked at you and she didn't see a person. She saw a problem that offended her worldview. The captain, a man in a position of ultimate authority, chose the path of least resistance, endorsing her prejudice rather than seeking the simple truth. The other passenger, Harrison, saw a chance to benefit from that prejudice. They formed a system, a small, ugly one, right there in row 2. They believe in a world where status, tenure, and the color of your skin give you the right to diminish others. That is a poison, Leo. And you cannot reason with poison. You can only demonstrate that it has a cost, a very, very high one." He gestured around them at the silent luxury that was their buffer against the world. "Our life, this," he said, "it's a fortress. But today you were outside the walls and the world showed you its face. My response wasn't about revenge. Revenge is a fire that consumes itself. This was about consequence. It was a business decision. When a company's culture is so broken that its employees feel empowered to humiliate a child, that company is a bad investment. It's a liability. We do not partner with liabilities. We do not fund them. We divest." A week passed. The financial world was still reeling. Robert Maxwell had barely survived a vote of no confidence from his board. Then a piece of news broke that seemed like a miracle for the crippled airline. An anonymous Swiss-based investment consortium, Helvetia Capital, had approached Global Wings Alliance. They offered to refinance the entire billion-dollar credit line for the Airbus fleet, saving the modernization deal from total collapse. The terms were strict, but GWA was in no position to argue. They signed the deal with desperate relief, never realizing that the sole owner of Helvetia Capital was Sterling Dynamics. Damien had not only punished them, he had bought their leash. In his office, Damien reviewed the final contract before his counsel sent it over. Tucked deep within the covenants was a new non-negotiable clause. It mandated that Transatlantic Airways establish and fund a charitable endeavor. They were contractually obligated to donate $10 million a year for the next decade to a new foundation. This foundation would provide scholarships and fund international travel programs for gifted students from underprivileged communities, giving them opportunities they would otherwise never have. Damien, with a stroke of his pen, named it the Sagan Initiative. He later explained it to Leo. This is the real point, son. Burning down their stock price was a message. This is the change. We forced them to become an engine for the very thing they tried to deny opportunity for someone who looks like you, who comes from a place without connections but has a brilliant mind. We turned their ugliness into a scholarship. We made their prejudice pay for another kid's first flight. That is a victory. Leo continued to fly often solo. He still wore his comfortable hoodie, still lost himself in books about astrophysics and history. But something had changed. The air around him had changed. On a flight to Tokyo 6 months later, a flight attendant saw him in seat 3A and paused. There was a flicker of recognition, a shadow of the story that had become a legend in the industry. But then she simply smiled, a genuine smile of professional respect. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," she said. "Can I get you anything before we take off?" He was no longer invisible. He was a symbol, a quiet living reminder that character is not defined by the seat you're in, but by the dignity you carry. And in the silent calculus of power and consequence, his father had taught him the most important lesson of all, that true strength wasn't just about winning the battle, but about rewriting the rules of the war for everyone who would come after him. That single moment of prejudice on Flight 729 set off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. It shows us that sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the most power, and that karma, when it finally arrives, doesn't always knock. It can hit like a stock market crash. The story of Leo Sterling, Brenda Miller, and the billion-dollar phone call is a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, the consequences of our actions can be massive, swift, and absolute. It proves that a person's character isn't defined by their status or their uniform, but by how they treat others, especially when they think no one powerful is watching. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who needs to see that justice can come from the most unexpected places. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of real-life drama and hard-hitting karma. What would you have done in Leo's situation? Let us know in the comments below.